So you made it to 4 BC of Dead Cells.
Impressive.
According to Steam statistics, you are already in the top 4.6% of players. And I'm sure by now you've noticed some new mechanics that hinder your progression. And today I'm gonna list some tips as well as an example run at the end of the video to let you guys know what to look out for at this new difficulty setting. So without further ado, let's not waste any more time and get straight into the tips. Something important to remember right off the bat is that 4 BC is not just a flat difficulty increase from the previous difficulty modifiers. In fact, the metagame at 4/5 BC is actually pretty different. Some weapons, skills, and mutations are actually more viable at this stage of the game, such as the Frantic Sword. But some items are less viable, such as the Twin Daggers or the War Spear, because they're just not good enough. So at this stage of the game, you can actually be more open to experimentation as you would before. Secondly, I'm sure you've noticed this already, but now most enemies will teleport to your location. And sometimes, you find yourself getting into fights that you cannot finish. So you know that rune that you got from beating Hand of the King at 0 BC? It's called the Homunculus rune, where you can detach your head. However, if you see a cluster of enemies that you know you cannot beat, you can launch your head at one of them, which gets them to teleport to you, so you can isolate it from the crowd. This way, you can beat the enemies one by one, which is a lot safer as opposed to having to deal with them all at the same time. Notice that this strategy is only available at this stage of the game. Color differences are very apparent now. If I were to estimate from personal knowledge, I would say in the late game, getting hit by a pretty heavy attack will kill you in 2 to 3 hits if you're playing Tactics, 3 to 4 if you're playing Brutality, and 4 to 6 if you're playing Survival. This makes survival builds technically the easiest color to win with, and tactics the hardest, though there are a lot of discussions on how that is not true. But if you find yourself struggling a lot, then I would say try to lean towards survival builds, because by the game standards, they are the easiest to win the game with. So by this point, I'm sure you have taken a couple of curse chests and kind of dabbled with the parrying mechanic. However, unfortunately at this stage of the game, taking curse chests and knowing how to parry are almost mandatory. Every single scroll stat will count towards the run ending in a victory or defeat. Right before the Hand of the King fight, you should have around 30 to 32 scroll stats in your main color based on personal experience. Anything below 30 is pushing it, and obviously anything above 32 is great. My personal highest scroll statted run was 37. And you might think, well, if I'm just like 1 or 2 scroll stats behind the average, then it shouldn't be too much of a big deal, right? Well, actually, if you compare a run with 28 stats versus 32 stats, the difference in damage output is actually pretty significant. But regardless of the route that you picked to progress with your run, you should have at least around 30 stats right before the Hand of the King fight. If you didn't, then you either did not take all the curse chests, you picked a route that didn't really give enough scroll fragments, or you just got extremely unlucky with dual stat scrolls. The next tip is more of a subtlety guide, but basically, you must have noticed by now that some weapons in the game swing very slowly, such as the broadsword. I'd like to introduce something I like to call air queuing, and that is if you charge up the attack in mid-air while you're falling, you can initiate some damage right after you touch the ground. This can be done with flint, broadsword, symmetrical lance, a lot of the slow melee weapons. You can also get a little creative. There's this one ranged weapon called Nerves of Steel, which deals a critical hit when you release the attack button at the correct timing. However, you can be a bit more strategic by holding it while you're falling in mid-air and timing it perfectly so that it lands the critical hit right when you land on the ground. Obviously, this technique is not limited to the weapons I just mentioned, so you can get pretty creative with it. I mentioned this briefly, but parrying at this stage of the game is almost mandatory. You should feel safer and more comfortable with a shield than without one. I will make a full shield guide sometime in the future explaining every single shield, but just know by this point that I would say it's slightly easier to beat the game with a shield than without one. You should be so comfortable with parrying that you're comfortable with parrying Inquisitor projectiles even while cursed. That's how you know you've mastered it. Your 3 mutations at 4/5 BC are going to matter a lot. You want all 3 of those slots to contribute to giving you an advantage. I do have a mutations guide put out. Just remember that you can always re-roll your mutations. This is especially important when you go into a boss fight where your mutations loadout can be a bit different than what you use when you go through biomes. Bottom line is, When you're fighting a boss, especially the Hand of the King, or any of the endgame bosses, I would recommend Emergency Triage or Disengagement because they're just very good defensive options. It should be made clear that there are absolutely no flask recharges at 4/5 BC. However, there are still other ways to heal, such as the Alienation mutation, as well as food shops. And since you get the most amount of gold at 4/5 BC, it's easier for you to purchase the 20,000 gold flask recharges in food shops. Just note that you do have to plan ahead and buy your items accordingly so that you're never short of purchasing a health flask. And lastly, it is okay to use custom mode. As I believe, as well as the devs believe, custom mode is not cheating. If you're struggling with 4/5 BC, I would suggest limiting to yourself to a smaller set of items in custom mode, not small enough to disable achievements obviously, and then slowly expand that list higher and higher as you feel that you're progressing through the game more consistently. At the end of the day, variety is what makes this game fun, and while the game is easier with less items, if you have more, then the game is more fun. Hence the reason why I always play in normal mode. So go out there and experiment. Obviously, just watching this video will not make you beat 5 BC. There is still a lot to learn even at this level. I have over 200 hours logged into this game and I'm still finding new stuff. With that being said, let's now move on to the example run. Now, just like the 3 BC guide, I'm going to follow the same requirements and principles as I did for that video. So what are these principles? Well, first of all, I'm going to go into a custom game and disable 3 items in particular. Those 3 items can only be obtained at 5 BC. And on top of that, I'm going to completely disable plus and plus tier items as well as S tier items, just to prove to you guys that it is possible to beat it without the legendary forge. Though at this point, you probably should be looking at investing in the forge so that you can get a bit more firepower. That being said, if an item can be found in 4 BC, namely its blueprint, then I can and I will be using that item. Just like my 3 BC guide example run, I also have an uncut version of this run in the description if you want to watch that instead. It's an unlisted video of this run, but with no cuts in the middle. Just be warned, there's no commentary, there's no music, it's in a lower quality, and it's over 1 hour long. So starting off in the prisoner's quarters, you'll notice that I'm not really used to the heavy crossbow, but basically I wanted an item that did a lot in the beginning of the game, and I think the heavy crossbow has what it takes, considering that I technically only have to upgrade half of that weapon in order for it to be viable, because let's be real here, that reload animation isn't going to do anything in my gameplay. And in the second biome, the Dilapidated Arboretum, you'll notice that I'm going to buy an heavy crossbow. Now, I mentioned that in my 2/3 BC guides that you should not purchase items in the early game, but since at 4/5 BC, you are given the most amount of gold upon killing enemies, I thought it was okay as long as I managed my gold well. So this meant that I couldn't really purchase anything in the next couple of biomes, so I can actually stay ahead on health flasks should I actually use one. You'll notice that I'm not doing a lot of damage at this point in the game, and that's to be expected when all of your items are not upgraded. You'll notice that for my first mutation, I picked up Kill Rhythm because I think it actually synergizes very well with the heavy turret, and right in this stage of the game, I needed my weapons to do something because they are not upgraded at all. Just watching out for the flying enemies as well as the mushrooms, they actually end up doing a lot of damage, as I just found out actually. And this is where I'm going to replace the Owl of War and replace it with a powerful grenade. And now I have my entire loadout aligning with survival, which is my color that I'm picking. But I didn't get 30 kills in the first biome, though luckily I did get 60 kills in this biome. So while I couldn't unlock the 30 kill door, I am able to do that this time with the 60 kills. And I'm going to head into the prison depths, and I don't find anything interesting, so I just decided to recycle it, which is kind of unfortunate. I was really hoping for a powerful item this early in the game, and because I thought that would really help me out. But here, I'm going to re-roll the heavy crossbow into a ++ tier, and you'll notice that one of the affixes I got was victims slowed down nearby enemies. And for my second mutation, I'm going to pick up Frostbite, and you'll see why I did this in a second. So when you kill an enemy, while that affix is there, it's going to damage nearby enemies even though I'm not even there because of Frostbite. And this is one of the reasons why I rated Frostbite to be very, very good on my mutations tier list. And I'm going to get the curse and find a challenge rift here. Though I didn't want to go in yet because obviously I don't see a point of going through challenge rifts while you're cursed unless you have a death wish. But just taking it really slowly, at this point I should note that taking curses are slightly different than as you would taking them at lower difficulty settings, because now enemies will teleport to you. Obviously sometimes this can be obnoxious, but just plan around it. Always anticipate enemies when they teleport and you should be fine, honestly. At times I actually think that lifting curses at this stage of the game is actually easier than previous BC levels. That being said, I pick up the wolf trap and I move on to the morass of the banished. And I just wanted to load up the crossbow, spam my skills, and just like that the first tick monster is dead. And for my final mutation, I picked up gastronomy. This is another one of those mutations that's just very, very good in general. And yeah, you see, it lowered my health all the way to 1. But as you can see here, I went to the food shop and just look at that recovery. That is the reason why gastronomy is just so overpowered. Gastronomy doubles the amount food can heal you for. So normally that piece of cheese was going to heal me for 50% of my health, but since I had gastronomy, it healed me for 100% of my health. So if you have nothing better to pick, I would say gastronomy is just a very solid mutation. And getting the second curse chest now, I gotta be a bit careful in the morass of the banished because a lot of the enemies are very mobile, they can shoot you from a distance, and you just gotta be really, really careful. This is a problem with the heavy crossbow considering that right after you fire, it kinda freezes you in place, which can land you in a lot of trouble actually. But thanks to kill rhythm, the attack animation is sped up, so it's not really too big of an issue. Just keeping my eye out for secrets and challenge rifts. I did find a piece of cheese that healed me for a further 30% of my health, so as you can see, you really don't need health flasks when you have gastronomy because it's just so overpowered. And just like that with the second tick monster, I'm going to just kill it as easily as I did the first. I did find a challenge rift earlier, and the reason that I didn't go into it right away was because I wanted to get 60 kills before I went in, as if I got hit in the challenge rift, it would reset my kills, and that would not be very good for me. But anyways, go into the 60 kill door. I don't find anything, which is pretty unfortunate, so I just recycled it for extra gold. But I'm going to head into the Mama Tick fight, and I'm going to take a hit here because I clearly underestimated the amount of time I had before Mama Tick did the attack. But once the first scythe phase comes out, I'm just gonna go into the corner and roll into it. I do plan on doing a guide on every single boss in the game in one video. So if you don't have a shield just like me, the safest thing to do in this scenario is to just roll into the wall when you see the exclamation mark right under your feet. But I tried to chain together the heavy crossbow attacks, as the second one did not do a critical hit, and I just realized it wasn't very effective. So it looks like I am gonna have to reload my crossbow every single time I fire it in order to increase my damage. But other than that, it's actually doing a lot of work for me. As you can see, just pump it once, and it actually erased a lot of Mama Tick's health just in one burst. So just gonna keep up this combo that I'm doing. Of course, dodging the scythes, it's pretty simple once you know the pattern. Just roll once, jump through the second, and then roll again. She does the melee attack, but of course just move away. I normally would still fire my ranged weapon if this was long range, but unfortunately heavy crossbow, you really have to go up and close to the enemy in order for it to be effective. But just like that, one more burst is gonna do it. I did take a hit in the Mama Tick fight, so I did lose the no-hit, which is kind of unfortunate. And I wanted to spice things up, so I decided to go to the Fractured Shrines. On top of that, I do know that there is a vault in this biome that has 3 legendary items, and I thought one of them could really help me with my run. As you're all aware by now, I do not have upgraded items unlocked, so I thought the legendary item was really gonna help me out here. But I'm going to get the third curse chest, and this is one of those biomes that you just really have to be careful with the curse, because it's so easy to mess up, as there are a lot of pitfalls in the area, there are a lot of traps, and the terrain is kind of hard to navigate sometimes. But I just pick out my enemies one by one, You do have to play aggressively, just like the previous difficulty levels, but you do have to be aware of what you're getting yourself into. Definitely don't want to head into a fight you cannot finish. But I'm progressing nicely with the curse actually. Wait for the slasher to get into the perfect position, go up behind it and shoot it once. Just gonna reload the crossbow every single time, and thanks to kill rhythm, it reloads a lot faster than it's supposed to. But I'm going to fight the first guardian monster, and of course I get hit. That swing animation comes out a bit later than what you might expect, so obviously gotta wait a bit for that. But I find a legendary cluster grenade in the vault, and I decided to take it so I can run double cluster grenades. I'm not really sure if this was the best choice, but I wanted to be cool with the legendary item. It's not very often that I run 2 of the same items, so I just thought might as well do it. And again, look through the walls, find all the secrets, and get an additional piece of cheese, and that heal me 30% on my health. And once I finish with the biome, gonna purchase some items and move on to the Forgotten Sepulchre. Now I know in the transition area it says Clock Tower, but you can actually go to the Forgotten Sepulchre from the Fractured Shrines. You just have to go to this teleporter that's off from the path in the transition area. But other than that, I'm going to get the 4th and final curse chest in the Forgotten Sepulchre, and as soon as I saw that elite aggro on me, I just decided to book it out of there, because I just didn't want to deal with that. You generally don't want to aggro elites while you're cursed, it's just a bad idea. But luckily it was in one of those rooms, so I could just exit out of there and keep on going with the run. Gonna speed up this part a bit, and progressing nicely with the curse. It doesn't really matter how many curses you lift in a single game. I think the maximum I've lifted was 5. But once you get used to curse chests, they're really not very intimidating. Just play very carefully to the best of your abilities, and you should be fine, honestly. But I'm going to go back into that challenge room, and as soon as I walked in, I got hit by the crystal projectiles. So luckily, I didn't go back in there while I was still cursed. But I'm gonna take some damage with the traps. Kind of unfortunate, I wasn't feeling my best in this run. I believe when I was recording, it was like 1 AM at the time, so I guess I had a hard time concentrating. But other than that, you can see how I'm just melting through the biome right now. Just aim the crossbow at something, and because of the victim's slowdown affix, it's just able to kill the bats right away. And moving into the giant boss fight, the reason I'm picking the giant to fight is because I wanted to skip High Peak Castle, as I wanted to make this run nice and short. And I'm going to reroll my mutations into Kill Rhythm, Disengagement, as well as Instinct of the Master of Arms. You could pick Frostbite in this scenario, but honestly, I feel like Frostbite just didn't do enough for me in boss fights. And I did say this in the tips section, but I do think Disengagement is one of the best boss mutations you can have in the game, because it's just such a nice defensive option. It gives you a backup plan if you actually mess up, so if you get your health down to 20%, you can safely heal without worrying that you will die. But it's not very often I head into the giant fight without a shield, and you can see how the heavy crossbow is actually kind of struggling in this fight. But luckily, I'm able to get the giant down to 50% of the health. When the crystals come down, I know some people just like to not attack the eyeball completely and just try to dodge the projectiles, but I like to sneak in and attack once every often, because I just think that if the timing is right, you can sneak in some attacks. It is in your best interest to stay in boss fights as short as possible. Got some value with the Death Orb there. One more burst of attacks is gonna do it, I believe. And just like that, the giant is down. Now, as I said before, I am going to skip High Peak Castle, and I don't find anything too interesting in the transition area. That being said, if you look at my scroll stat right now, I am at exactly 30, which is exactly where you want to be for a 4/5 BC run. And I don't use the heavy crossbow very often, so I don't believe I'm going to no-hit this fight. But I don't have a shield as well. You can see how I mistimed that one attack by Hand of the King. But not to worry, this is survival, so you are given the most amount of health to work with. But you can see how the giant whistle is kind of interrupting the hand's attacks, and this can kind of get troublesome, but honestly it's not that bad. But the main focus of this fight is to just stay aggressive, and you see there when he summoned the monsters, I healed up even though I was at 55%. The reason for this is that when Hand of the King summons the enemies, it's probably the safest time when you can safely use your health flask. So I would say at that stage of the game, if you're at 50% or higher health, then just don't be stingy and use a health flask. Because right now, this is the end game. Don't try to save up your resources, you can just go all out. There is absolutely no reason for you to hold back and save up on the health. As a lesson that I've learned from a lot of hours into this game is that when you get greedy, you will be punished for it. Other than that, dodge some of the Hand of the King's attacks, and there we go, Hand of the King is down, and we just finished the run at 4 BC. So this concludes the example run for this guide. Hopefully you found this guide helpful. You are very close to the end of the game. I believe you can do it, and good luck on the grind.